Hey, Red Letter Disciples, it's Zach Zender, the host of the Red Letter Disciple. This podcast is designed to challenge you to be a greater disciple of Jesus, believing that when we live as great disciples, we change the world. And so today we have an awesome opportunity. Honestly, this is a conversation I've really been looking forward not only to having myself, but to having you listen to. Dr. Mart Thompson, a professor at Concordia Seminary and the head of the SMP, the Specific Ministry Pastor Program, is joining me to shed light on more of what the SMP program has always been about and what the latest restrictions and policies mean for the future of not only the program, but our church body. So super grateful to have him come on. I'll tell you a little bit more about our conversation in just a moment. But first, thanks to today's sponsor, Carey Nieuwhof's Art of Leadership Academy is one of the great places to be online these days if you are a church leader. I have found this academy to be incredible for breaking growth barriers. This is the place where pastors and church leaders who break and who care about breaking growth barriers exist. And so I'd love to have you in there. And it's awesome because right now you get to join for free. And also right now, I'm leading weekly Wednesday conversations, noon central, around discipleship, in particularly caring about and thinking about and going further with Carey Nieuwhof's 7 annual church trends of 2026. And so those conversations, there's a few more of them happening. They're all free inside of his academy. So please join, find me in there, and hang out with a bunch of great church leaders. Hey, we are looking for more sponsors for future Red Letter Disciple podcast episodes. Wonderful news, our podcast is growing. More and more people are watching and listening. And so if you have a business, a ministry, an organization, and you want to get the word out about what you're doing, we really believe that we can help with that. And we've got some really affordable rates for you to consider. And so please email us, hello@redletterchallenge.com, and we can give you more information on what it looks like to be a sponsor of the Red Letter Disciple podcast. We can help get your ministry and organization news out there to a whole lot of people, especially church leaders and especially in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. So, hey, Dr. Mart Thompson comes on and we have, listen, if you want to understand what the SMP program is, this is the episode for you. You will hear the origin, the purpose of SMP, the types of students it's produced, and the ministries that it's been helping over the years. We also do get into the new policies and why they were chosen and what it means for the sake of our future church body and future pastors. And so I really think that in a world filled with a lot of opinions, and y'all know I've got a strong opinion on SMP, and so many others do because pastoral formation is so important. In a world filled with a lot of opinions, what we need more than anything is to understand. And this is an episode where I don't really get into my opinion too much, but just simply seek to understand. And so I hope you listen in and you'll learn something new. I did, and I hope it's helpful for you. So, hey, subscribe and follow on whatever listening or watching platform is your favorite. And let's get to today's episode with Dr. Thompson from Concordia Seminary. Let's do this. All right. Well, I am really pumped today about today's conversation because I think actually it's going to be extremely helpful for any listener out there that's been listening in or cares about pastoral formation and the future of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. This is a pretty hot topic and a lot of opinions are out there. It's a big year because it's a convention year, and a lot of things have been going on in pastoral formation. And so what I think all of us need, though, in all of these opinions is greater understanding. And I think that's what we're going to get today because we're bringing on Dr. Thompson from Concordia Seminary in St. Louis, who is the head of the SMP program. So, Mart, thank you. Dr. Thompson, thank you so much for joining me on Red Letter Disciple. How's the day going so far?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Zach. It's going well. Thank you.
You bet. And thank you for your work there in what you do to raise up men for work as pastors in our churches. And so I'm sure you know about and hear kind of a lot of the chatter around pastoral formation and even the SMP program. So I thought it'd be awesome to bring you on just to kind of, there's probably no one better that understands this program than you. I'm going to frame it like this. I've got 10 questions for SMP for you, and I'm going to get those in a moment. I'd just love for you to give us more understanding. But before we even get into SMP, you do some great work around discipleship, right? And even have taken a sabbatical recently to work on a new work around discipleship. So tell me your heart kind of around discipleship and where that came from and what you're working on these days.
Sure. Well, thanks for asking about that. Yes, I just completed the manuscript, and it's in copy editing right now with CPH, a book called Christ-Centered Family Discipleship, a map for guiding congregations and supporting homes. So my work is especially with raising children in the faith and discipling children, and how the partnership of the home and congregation is the effective way to do that. And so that's what that book's about. I direct a grant that is supporting curriculum revision in that regard at the seminary, and partnering with some other folks, Concordia Center for the Family, to try to impact family discipleship, raising children in the faith in our church body.
That's beautiful. I want to circle back to that because obviously I have a heart for pastoral formation, but discipleship is a huge piece for me and what I've dedicated sort of the last decade of my life to help. And that's ultimately the goal of this podcast, is to challenge people to be greater disciples. And we're having some very Lutheran Church Missouri Synod-focused conversations because at the end of the day, I really want to raise up great disciples in our church body too. And I want to come back to that. And so thank you for offering that work to the greater church, and I'd love to hear more. But let's jump into SMP because, again, lots of opinions, lots of misunderstandings out there. And so I just kind of love to kind of go back to the beginning. What is the origin, or what was the origin of SMP?
Yeah, SMP was officially started in 2007 when the LCMS in convention passed a resolution to initiate this program, to have the seminaries develop ministerial formation programs for this brand new rostering status. First time in the history of our synod that we had a rostering status that was unique, called specific ministry pastor. And so the seminaries, both Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne and Concordia Seminary here in St. Louis, developed programs. And then in 2000, it kicked off. That was when our first classes started here at the seminary. The origin goes back a couple of decades, actually, when the Missouri Synod just started to go into distance education. Eventually, they developed a program a lot of people will know as DELTO. And DELTO stands for Distance Education Leading to Ordination. In case people
we love our acronyms in the LCMS.
Yeah, we do. And it was our experience in that taught us a lot of things that were done well in DELTO, a lot of things that maybe we needed to adjust because of that experience. And then the other piece, it's kind of a couple of streams coming together, because DELTO was focused on just distance education, forming people for various types of ministries. It didn't restrict it, say, to sole pastor or staff pastor or mission planner. It had in view various types. And then there was a resolution passed in the 1980s, I think it was 88, called the Licensed Lay Deacon Resolution, which established this classification known as Licensed Lay Deacon, or LLD. And that was to try to serve small parishes that couldn't afford a pastor. But the problem is that never made them pastors. And so they were asked to function like pastors without ever having been certified and then or called and ordained as pastors. They're always licensed lay deacon. So the SMP program was the coming together of kind of the DELTO plan and the licensed lay deacon plan. And it was what I'm told, I wasn't involved at that time, a wonderful process of a convention where they kept coming to the convention floor, back to committee, where they were hashing things out. And what resulted from all of that was the SMP program.
Great.
So and that's a little thumbnail sketch.
Yeah, so that's at the 2007 convention that it officially came together. And so, as we kind of go through, that was question one. I've got 9 more questions. This is kind of to keep me on board too, without getting too much of my opinions involved, which is great, because people know my opinions. So what would you say then is the purpose of SMP? How was it? What was it originally designed to do? And has that changed over the years, or is that similar purposes?
I'll just say, first of all, it really hasn't changed over the years.
Okay.
There has been some tweaking, and the new admissions requirements kind of reflect a little bit of that, and we'll talk about those later. But the vision of this was, these are pastors formed to serve in congregations which can't really fill these needs by calling from the field, as we say, or assignments out of residential seminary. And we always like to say SMP is a ministry needs driven program. So we're trying to address need for ministry that, like I said, can't be filled simply by calling someone from the general roster of the synod to serve as pastor.
Great. So ministry needs. So the next question then is what ministries are served by, have been and are served by SMP?
Yeah, good question. So we have sole pastor congregations. In other words, the congregation doesn't have a pastor and they raise up this local person. And I can tell you a little bit more about the students later, but they're going to be a local person that is raised up to serve the needs of that specific ministry, that congregation. Most of those, the vast majority, are bivocational or part-time, and those congregations typically, and I'd say 80 to 90% of the time in SMP, are served by a pastor who both has another job and then serves in a part-time capacity because that congregation can't pay for a full-time pastor. Also, we have staff pastors. That means they're on staff at a congregation that has full-time pastors, or at least one full-time pastor, and they serve in a capacity, again, typically part-time. 80 to 90%, I think today, are going to be part-time that are SMP pastors that oftentimes have a particular set of gifts or skills that congregation can use. And then, of course, they're filling a need that they can't fill from the field because this is a part-time person. We're operating with the assumption that in the vast majority of men in the general roster status have to serve full-time. That's their livelihood. That's my livelihood as a seminary professor, and for my 28 years in the parish, I didn't have another job. So that's common. In SMP, it's common that the guy isn't full-time.
So sole pastor, staff pastor, those are the primary two?
Primary, true. We also have a number of chaplains. So they could be institutional chaplains like high school chaplains, nursing home chaplains. What are some of the others? Actually, prison chaplains, folks like that. Now, military chaplaincy is a different thing. They require a degree that you don't get through the SMP program. So that is not a chaplaincy that we fulfill, but the others we do. And then we do have mission planting pastors who are planting new congregations. And again, a lot of times those are bivocational men because mission plants often can't afford a full-time pastor. And maybe they'll work into that status.
Yeah. Yeah, I know even in my story, when I planted a church in Central Florida out of seminary, it was a bivocational call, and it was something that, that if we're starting something from scratch, you got to start that way.
Right.
So it sounds like then a variety of ministries when you have sole pastors, staff pastors, mission planters, chaplains, but in most of the cases, these are bivocational folks that are joining the SMP, which is really good to know. So what is the? I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding with what SMP is because there's a lot of talk about residential versus online education, and SMP is actually a hybrid, right? And so talk to us about the basic program for SMP formation and what it looks like.
Sure. Yeah, the program has both an online component that is prominent where you learn in online live classrooms, just like you and I are talking right now. If you were the professor and I was the student, I would be in your classroom, and on the screen would be 11 other guys who are also learning in your classroom. And that online component involves a lot of work in the congregation and personal study the week prior to the online session. We use a journal format where they do a lot of writing. They have tests that they take that are graded online and reviewed by the professor. So it's a highly integrated curriculum. I would say it's state-of-the-art, what we call ODE, online distance education. It involves very much contextual components. We have local mentor pastors, and you've served and are serving as a mentor pastor. where you have conversations with your student that week about what he is studying, reading, writing about, tests he's taking, and then about how that's applied. Typically with our mentors, we give practical application questions that they reflect on with their student. And the student then writes about that in his journal and submits it to the professor as part of his weekly grade. And so that's the online version of the program. And every spring and fall class is that way. The majority of summer classes and all of the winter classes, however, are in person on campus for what we call 1 week intensive classes. Now, both of them are worth, in academic parlance, 2 semester hours. And the way we do this on campus version is they spend a lot of time before they get to campus. And I know from talking to the ones you have mentored, they spend a lot of time reading and writing and taking tests before they get to campus. Then they have a full week. We call them intensives because it's all day long, Monday through Friday classes where they meet with the professor in class. And then they have projects after class that they have to complete and submit online. So those are the 2 different forms. So in a sense, it's a hybrid program where it's both online and in person, but it's a hybrid program where you don't move to the seminary. You travel here for these short-term intensives, but you still live and work in the congregation where you're serving.
And talk to me kind of around the program then. It's for those that aren't as familiar, it's a 4-year program, right? So 16 classes, ordination's a part of it. So explain a little bit of the overall and what the 4 years looks like.
Sure, be happy to. This is good preparation because next week I have the spring orientation for the incoming 2026 spring cohort. And I will say, as I call them, the cohort is we are a cohort-based program. So the group of guys you enter with, and we cut our cohorts off at a maximum of 12 for pedagogical reasons. This is, again, we're a state-of-the-art online distance education, and that's why we do that, even though it's an expensive program because of that. But these guys become a band of brothers in their cohort over the 4 years. And as you say, it's a year-round program where they go to the class in spring, summer, fall and winter, or if they're the fall entering cohorts, fall, winter, spring, summer, year-round for 4 years. They take 1 class at a time, but it's an intensive set of requirements that they fulfill for those classes. So it's a master's level. They can go on and get a Master of Arts degree using these courses with the addition of a little more coursework, but it is a rigorous program in that way. It mirrors the residential program, but it is distinct in a couple of ways. One is it's less classes. It's only about 40% of the academic requirements of the residential MDiv program. And it's heavily in systematic and practical theology classes. And we have a significant number of classes for exegetical students, but not as nearly as much as the residential program. And those classes are taught in English, the English exegesis classes, versus in residential, we use Greek and Hebrew in teaching the students how to read the scriptures. We're also a little thin on historical theology. It is the same level, but it is less in the amount of work in the residential program.
So it sounds like, like you just said, so a little higher on the systematic and the practical, a little lower on exegetical and the languages, right? Okay.
And if I might add, so that is accounted for in this, as I referred to earlier, as a unique rostering status of the SMP program. It's called Specific Ministry Pastor, SMP rostering status, which has some restrictions to it in compared to the general pastor certification, which is what the residential students have. And I want to quickly point out, these are still fully pastors, confessionally, according to our Lutheran confessions. They're Word and Sacrament ministry pastors, but they are limited in a few areas because they don't have the biblical languages and because it's a part-time program. Even though it's intense and over 4 years, it is still a part-time program. So they are not, the status doesn't allow them to serve as senior pastors in congregations. They also are always under the supervision of a generally rostered pastor, someone say like yourself. So students that you take through the SMP program are probably also going to be your supervisees as a pastor. There's other limitations, like they can't represent the ministerium, say at the synodical convention. There you have to be a generally certified pastor to be a delegate, a pastoral delegate to the synodical convention. And the call is in view of probably at that congregation where they're formed. Because that's another key to this, is that you are certified in the type of ministry in which you are formed in this program. So if you're a staff pastor at a large church, then that's where your rostering status locates you. If, for example, something happens to where you need to take a call elsewhere, it needs to be a lateral move to that same type of ministry where you would serve under supervision somewhere else. And same thing with the sole pastor and mission planning pastor, that kind of thing. I hope that, there's a lot of nuances to this. So you can read more about it on our website, at the seminary website.
Very good. And alongside that basic program, correct me if I'm wrong, it's usually after the 9th class. So there's 16 total classes. After the 9th class, it leads to ordination, which is a big deal because a lot of us in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, the reason ordination is so important for those listening in is because those are the ones that we want to administer word and sacrament. Word and sacrament is so huge for us. And so if ordination is sort of the thing that is needed to do that, that's a big deal. So that's after the 9th class, is that correct?
Yeah,
Dr. Thompson?
You're correct.
Okay.
It's generally, I sometimes will say that's the earliest it can be, and generally that is the case. There can be extenuating circumstances because of changes in vicarage things or academic issues or something that cause that to be delayed towards the end. But generally speaking, it is after the 9th class, and that reflects the ministry needs-driven aspect of this program. So a number of our congregations won't have word and sacrament ministry unless they bring in somebody from the outside who can help out. But some of them are in very remote places. This program really serves well that kind of a situation. And so we want them to be able to do sacramental ministry as soon as possible. But I should add to that, and some listeners might anticipate this question, well, can they just stop after the 9th class? The answer is no. You have to complete the program on schedule or your rostering status would be removed. And that is why I mentioned that generally it's going to be after the 9th class, but we've built in hedges to make sure guys can see it through to the finish line. So there's a higher minimum GPA for that early ordination. And also other factors are taken into consideration based on our experience that says, okay, this person is going to make it through to the end. Whereas I have had a couple of situations where I've had to delay because we know that, well, we're not sure about this. And we never want to have or put a district president in a position to have to de-roster somebody. That is not what we want to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, in my history with some SMP students, it's nice to have something kind of around the midpoint to celebrate. And then you get to celebrate again when they graduate. And so I've got a senior in high school right now. And I probably knew this, but needed to be reminded of this. But like when they're, applying for colleges and they're looking at GPA, my oldest son is pointing out to me, Dad, they're looking at the end of my junior year. What I do in the senior year doesn't even matter. I was like, yeah, I know, but you still got to graduate. So finish strong, bud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So from your perspective, what are some of the unique opportunities then with the SMP program?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as I said, because it is ministry needs driven, we are able to serve in places that otherwise couldn't get a pastor. They can't afford to call from the field, or there are other extenuating circumstances that make it very difficult. Maybe they've tried for a long time, and now they're recognizing, hey, we've got somebody here in our congregation who has the gifts and qualities and also interest in being formed as a pastor that we can raise up to do that. And then the fact that, well, I'm not suggesting that bivocational ministry is an ideal that we're working towards. It's just a necessity in certain situations. And also, it can serve this way in a larger congregation where you maybe would like to have some additional staff, but bringing on, more full-time pastors is not something that the budget will allow in those situations. And so it does provide the opportunity for seminary level, high quality formation for pastoral ministry, even for bivocational guys.
Yeah. That's cool. Tell us, you've been, how long have you been the director or been involved with SMP, Dr. Thompson?
Well, I've been the director. I'm in my 10th year.
Okay, cool.
So
nice.
About 9.5 years. I actually started teaching in SMP 4 years before that, in 2012. I had never heard of SMP. I'd completed my doctoral work, and I was asked if I would be interested in teaching the faith. So I taught that for 4 years. And it was interesting because I was skeptical about distance education before I was asked to teach. I just said, I'll do it because I want to teach at the seminary. But then I gained to appreciate it and the impact that it can have. So that's kind of what led me into this role. And then for some reason they decided to call me, and I was thinking I was being called simply to teach in the practical department because I love teaching pastoral theology. I teach the capstone course for that for our residential students, as well as teaching the faith and some other classes. They said, oh no, yeah, we want you to do that, but we also are now making this a full-time position. And along with that means that every fall I go and visit SMP vicars all over the country. So
that's cool.
In their second year in the program, they get a personal visit from me. I visit them and their vicarage supervisors and their wives. And yeah, so that's a little bit about me and my involvement.
Cool. So you've gotten to see then over the course of that decade hundreds of students. And so tell me about some of the students in SMP. Who are the students that it's reaching that you've ran into?
Yeah, great question. So the SMP students, everybody has their unique gifts and abilities, but in this particular demographic, which interestingly enough, before these new requirements came out, we track personal demographics of the students, and every single year the average entrance age to the SMP program is 47. Now, why 47? I have no idea, but it's uncanny. Every year it was 47. A couple years it was 46. But I think it's because of the nature of the program, this kind of ministry needs driven aspect, the restrictions on the certification, that lends it towards somebody who's only going to be serving, say, maybe the latter years of their professional life, those kind of things. But because of that, they have a tremendous amount of experience as churchmen and leaders in congregations. They typically are your kind of classic board of elders member or chairman of the congregation, people who have taught Bible class for years, those kind of things. And they're highly valued by the congregation. When a student enters the SMP program, their congregation is entering it as well. They're actually committing unofficially to calling this person after a couple of years in the program or at the end of the program, as we've discussed. Now, it's not an official call. Circumstances can change. Students decide that, no, this isn't for me, or congregations, there's circumstances which we had happen, for example, during COVID changed. And so sometimes that doesn't work out that way. But I make this point to say, with the SMP, we describe it as placement up front. In the residential seminary, you go to classes here for 4 years. You do your vicarage as one of those years, and then you're placed in a congregation at the end. In SMP, you know where you're going to go from the beginning. And the people who are involved in endorsing you for the program in the congregation are doing so realizing you're going to become their pastor. So that means that these guys have a lot of, qualities that people recognize that can serve well. They're very dedicated and organized students. They have a sacrificial mindset. Now, I want to point out, residential students are very sacrificial as well. I mean, you were one of those at one time, so was I. Your life turns upside down. You go to the seminary. It's a heavy load of classes and all those kind of things. But SMP also, even though they stay where they're at, they still have a lot of sacrifices that they make. And you've heard me talk about the math problem, and I'll mention that here. I tell the students, which I'll be doing next week at orientation, we're going to give you a math problem, and that is everything is staying the same in your life from before you enter this program, except now we're going to require an additional about 15 hours a week from you between classes and homework and your duties in the congregation. And I say 15 plus or minus 5. And most of the guys say it's more on the plus side than the minus side on that. So that means you got to make sacrifices. The family makes sacrifices in the home. Because one thing that is true in Lutheran education is we don't slack on the academic requirements, as I'm sure you can relate. And so you got to figure out how you're going to manage those. And so our students are very busy, but very dedicated in all that they do in this program.
Yeah, that's good. And I think that's really important to hear, that both residential and SMP, and really just any of us as disciples, we sacrifice is part of our daily call, and it gets dangerous when we start comparing sacrifice. And I certainly know through the SMP students I've had and many others that I've met, that it is a sacrifice, and for all involved, and it's a worthy sacrifice. And so, a few more questions on SMP. You mentioned maybe some, restriction status, things like that, but are there special requirements, SMP pastors or to be a SMP pastor that haven't been hit on yet?
Well, just a couple. One would not be a requirement, and that is that you don't have to have a bachelor's degree to be in the SMP program. Now, that might sound strange because our classes are taught at a master's degree level. And I think you'll find that we have students in the SMP program that have advanced degrees, masters, and even doctorates, and they would all to a person affirm that. So we account for that by putting a lot of weight and emphasis on the entrance exams that you have to pass before you enter the SMP program, and they're at the same level as the residential program. We call them entry-level competency exams, and they really do test your competency. Now, unlike the residential program where Greek and Hebrew competency is required, in SMP, we still require competency, though, in Christian doctrine, New Testament knowledge and understanding, and also Old Testament knowledge and understanding. Other than that, the requirements are quite similar. You have to be endorsed, and your specific ministry has to be endorsed by your district president. In other words, it has to be a good fit for this program. We're not in competition to the residential general pastor certification program. And I just want to make that clear, as you know, whatever conversations are out there right now about that doesn't involve SMP. I always say it's apples and oranges on that. And I will add that I highly value the residential program, as I know you do. And the residential program trains young men and older men for a lifetime in ministry, and gives them the kind of foundation that you and I received here at the seminary, and puts them in that, on that path. But having said that, the SMP program, informing men for their specific ministries, is also one that is seminary level education. And as I indicated, the distinctions between that and residential are accounted for by the restrictions. I'll just put them that way. I tell them guys up front, there are certain restrictions with the SMP certification. So yeah, that's the way the Synod has designed the program.
Yeah, that's helpful. And even understanding kind of, the requirements or admission requirements with the exams, because I have heard before, of how difficult the exams are. And part of
Hmm.
that is the admissions process. Is you may start with a number of folks that apply, but part of that application has several tiers or funnels that you got to work through, and one of those is you actually got to pass the entrance exams. And so, but I
Hmm.
think on the flip side of that, right, if it is at a program that doesn't require a bachelor's degree, those entry level exams are really important to understand, like, and to know that the person that's coming in has a strong theological base. Maybe they haven't been through years of university or college, but from a theological standpoint they're coming in strong, because they're robust. Like you said, we Lutherans prize
Hmm.
prize our academics. That's good to
Right,
hear.
right, right.
So yeah, obviously the new there were policy premises and policies that got produced in November, I believe it was, of last year, and quite a bit of folks are frustrated around those. I've voiced my opinion on that, and so not going to get into necessarily my opinion on that, but I just kind of like to hear from you, like, how are the new admissions parameters, guidelines for guardrails for SMP, or how we can understand, how those came to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So there has always been talk ever since SMP started about, okay, is this working the way it's supposed to do? Do we need to make changes? That kind of thing. It's probably been studied more than any other ministerial formation program in the history of our church body. I'm pretty sure I'm right on that.
Yeah, I'm sure you've been on the
And
back end of a lot of those.
I got involved in this when I became director and started to learn. I had no knowledge of all the kind of synod level conversations about it, none, which is probably good. And so once I learned about it, I saw that the way we were doing it was, well, let's try to have the synod and convention hash these things out. Well, you can imagine a voters meeting trying to hash out something that required this expertise. The synod and convention, it's like, wow. So in its wisdom, in fact, this goes back to 2019, the 2019 Synodical Convention. They said, okay, we've got things that need to be studied about SMP, and we're going to entrust the Pastoral Formation Committee, which is kind of the oversight of the seminaries and their work, with the job of providing recommendations to the Synod on certain things, and in other areas, just kind of making sure the program is running the way it should. So for the 2023, I think I got that right because COVID came in there and delayed the Synodical Convention a year. The Pastoral Formation Committee recommended to the floor committee that, because this was part of their was to study a few things, and one of those was, should we start requiring the biblical languages? Another, should we move ordination to the end of the program? And the Pastoral Formation Committee studied that and said, I can understand why people think that that might be a good idea, but what we learned from Delto, for example, which did require Greek, and what we need to provide through the licensed lay deacon solution with SMP makes that unreasonable. And with our older students, as some of you may know, the older you get, the harder it is to learn new languages and those kind of things. And it would cause too many people to not be able to take the program because of that. And plus, Delto was 6 years, so it would add 2 more years to the program if we followed that script. And so they recommended not to do it. Same thing with the ordination. They said this is a ministry needs driven program. While not every circumstance requires early ordination, we're just going to keep it the way it is. We don't want to have 2 classes of SMP, for example, and we still want to meet the needs of parishes and large or small and early ordination. And the way it was administered, and I have to say, in my tenure here, there's only been one instance where early ordination became an issue and somebody had to be derostered. And that was early in my tenure, and that was after that I proposed that we make some changes to guard against that happening. That didn't require the pastoral formation to put that guardrail in. I was able to do it. But there were other issues that were out there that the PFC, Pastoral Formation Committee, needed to address. And that's what they did. And I have to say, they did their due diligence. The seminary presidents, the chief mission officer of the synod, they met with me, interviewed me, my counterpart, Don Wiley at Fort Wayne. They consulted with him. They did their due diligence. And I will say, I know, Zach, you've said a few things about this. I endorse these new guidelines. I think that the work that they did on it makes sense. And I'll shed light on why I think that's the case. And everybody has their opinion, but we also look at something from a different position because of certain responsibilities we have. Pastoral Formation Committee has certain responsibilities. They're looking at things from the vantage point of what's not only best for the student, the congregation, but also the synod. And that kind of goes into their decision to do this. And from my perspective, I want to make sure that the program I'm charged with directing is serving well the needs of the students and the congregations that they're called to serve. So I'll just go through some of these real quickly.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Yeah,
all right.
Please.
First one is, let me preface this by saying, even though these requirements are there, and just like with the restrictions that I talked about before, SMP pastors are fully pastors. So there are just different requirements within the pastoral ministerium that have to be honored. There's certain requirements that I have to abide by as a seminary professor, as a roster church worker, and some things that happen in my congregation and so there's some apples and oranges there. Having said that, though, they're fully pastors, fully rostered with this specific ministry pastor status. The first one was this 5 years LCMS with significant service in congregations. So to apply to the SMP program with these new parameters or guardrails, that is generally a requirement, right? And I will say, if you read the 2007 resolution, it clearly reflects the spirit of that resolution. They had in view guys that were experienced members in a congregation, leaders in a congregation that the SMP program was built for. There just wasn't a requirement that had a number on it. And so that's where that 5, and that comes after 15 years of experience in the program. And we've learned that if you didn't know the congregation well, it becomes a problem because you're rostered for that congregation, so you need to make sure it's a good fit. Second one is 3 years in the specific ministry context. And that, again, is so that we know that that is a good fit. You may have a guy who is just on fire. Once he's a new Lutheran, he's new to your congregation, he's ready to serve, he can do these things, and then gets going and finds out, wait a minute, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. And in a few situations, just like with residential seminary, you'll have a guy who, even though they took the Christian doctrine qualifier, comes to find out, I don't know if I'm in agreement with all these doctrines or teachings. And the only times we've run into that are guys who have been just very short timers in the LCMS beforehand. So the third one is probably the most controversial, is the age of 40, that you need to be at least 40 years of age. People have asked me, well, is this going to really impact the enrollment in this program? And I'd say not that much. As I said, the average entrance age is 47. The reason for that, there are 2 points, though, that I give as a reason for why an age, and they set the age level. I didn't set the age level, but I go along with the principle of the age level because this program is much harder for younger guys because of the time commitment. With so many of our young guys, they work full-time jobs, they have all this seminary work, vicarage work, and then having a young family. And our attrition rate, I'm on record saying this to the council presidents, our attrition rate has been 4 times higher for young guys in the program than for the older guys. And some of that may be that when you get older, you maybe have a little more experience in managing those demands. But I think the larger part is you just have more demands when you're young. So that's one. And And the other thing is the SMP restrictions on what you can and can't do with this SMP certification are palpable. They're real. It's not ideal for a young guy to have those. We do have a route to go on and get a general pastor certification with SMP, but that's an additional 3 years on top of the 4-year SMP program. And so this kind of signals to the church that this program really isn't built or designed for younger guys. Now, having said that, and I pushed on this, and I was glad to see that the PFC did this, is that there are exceptions to these restrictions because we are a ministry needs driven program. And because of that, because we're ministry needs driven, if a place otherwise can't be served, and there is a young guy who's willing to make the sacrifices and who's able to do it, and I have stories of guys doing this, we don't want to deprive that congregation of having pastoral service. So there can be exceptions to those. There is a process for that the PFC came up with, and involves the district president would appeal to the council of presidents for the guy in his district to say, hey, can we grant an exception here? These are brand new requirements, though, so how all that is worked out by the COP, the council of presidents, and that's up above my pay grade. I just pushed for the exceptions clause.
Well, thank you for doing it, yeah.
And they were, I have to say, our seminary president, Tom Egger, and the provost at our seminary, Ron Mudge, and I'm not just saying this because they might be listening to this podcast at some point. Honestly, they have been so supportive of not just our residential program. Obviously, they're very supportive of that, but also our distance programs, including SMP. And they have really given me what I've asked for in trying to help this be the best program that it can. So I trust the Pastoral Formation Committee, and I really appreciate the parameters reflecting some of these things like the exceptions clause and stuff like that. The other things with the new requirements, nothing is really new there. There's some kind of procedural adjustments that I think improve the process. So the applicants need to speak to the admissions officers first, and I won't get into the details of that, but I will say that sometimes if the train gets down the track too far with the student and the congregation before they find out all the information about what it involves and some of the restrictions and those things, then that doesn't work well. And our admissions office does a great job of working with students and making them fully informed about this program. They also talk about the other seminary programs because we're student-centered in this approach. We want the student to go in the direction that they feel is going to best serve them. Typically, if you're in the SMP application process, there's a specific ministry need that is running the show already. But we want the student to understand what they're getting themselves into and trying to meet that need. Outside of that, the other requirements are just an attempt to try to honor in a more effective way the original intent of the SMP program, which circles back to what we said at the beginning, and that is it still kind of reflects the original design. Even though we have new admissions requirements, there is really nothing that is new about what it does and how it's done.
Yeah, no, thank you for walking through some of those specifically.
Thanks for your patience.
Yeah, no, it's great. I've heard, and so correct me if I'm wrong or if people, because part of this is like, we just need to understand. I've heard recently, and I don't know if it's a part of this or something else, that there's going to be greater preferential treatment towards, or I should say lesser preferential treatment towards congregations that have 1,000 members or more. Is there any truth to that, or did I see that or hear that?
I don't know where you saw it or heard it, but there is truth to it.
Okay.
And I'm the guy to talk to about it because I've kind of pushed for this. Okay, and so remember, one of our main principles in SMP is we're ministry needs driven. And that means that folks who, while it's your ministry, it's always going to be like, this is the thing we got to have met, right?
Right. 100%.
But for those of us who are working with multiple applicants, there are going to be some that have more of an urgency to it than others. So before I started working with our admissions folks on this, I don't want to take full credit for it. I'll take full blame, but I won't take full credit. Jesse Keeger in the admissions office worked closely with me on this and did a marvelous job, in my opinion, in helping me on this. There are situations where there's a greater need for someone, say, in a congregation that has no pastor, than, say, in a large congregation that also has pastor or pastors on staff. So that's how the criteria works. It's our best attempt to try to say, okay, what is the most crucial need at this point? And that is only kicks in if we have more applicants than we have space in the cohorts. With a cohort program, we cap it at 12 for each cohort. And at St. Louis, we have 3 cohorts a year, 1 in the spring and 2 in the fall. And that's 36 potential students. And if we have more than 12 qualified applicants that pass their competency exams and everything is in, then we have to figure out who's going to defer to the 6-month down the road thing. And I also want to point out, it's only the delay of half a year. That's why we have 2 admissions entry points, because we want to meet needs as soon as we can. If you're one of the ones that gets deferred, you will get in the next round. So it doesn't matter what your ranking was the first time, you will be at the head of the group in the next admission cycle. But as far as the urgency of the group that might be admitted right now for that particular cohort, the ones that have the greatest need based on available pastoral service are going to have the highest ranking. And so that's how that works. Before we did this, it was simply based on a timestamp. When you got your stuff in, when you completed your exams, which I didn't feel was fair because our published deadlines are one thing. And it seems to me like if you get things done by the published deadlines, you should be equally considered. But since we didn't have any kind of a system to rank these based on need, that's the most objective way we could do it, if that makes sense.
No, that's very helpful. I thought I'd heard of it, but I wasn't 100%. So that brings a little more clarity. I think part of the challenge in all this, it's a challenge for us to keep working through, right? Is, you guys at the seminary are student-centered and synod-focused, which is great. And the program is ministry needs-driven. And so when ministry, when student, when synod, when seminary, there's lots of things to think about, which makes it pretty challenging. Mm-hmm. And so I'm helpful to hear a little bit of your voice and to hear a little bit about the exceptions, and that maybe it's not for right now if, the cohort's full, but it's not never. Because I think sometimes us in larger churches are hearing things like this, and it's like when we don't hear or understand even what you just said, it leads us to assume things that aren't necessarily right, true, or fair. Now, we still might kick back and, want to talk about the importance of, we want pastors in every setting, and we want pastors to do word and sacrament ministry where they can't already have it. But we would also argue that, a lot of our larger churches need more pastors, and because there's still a lot of pastoral care to go around. And so that's a little tough, but I think we can, it's helpful to know. Final question on SMP is just what have been the outcomes, would you say, of SMP over the years? What are the outcomes we should expect out of the students that come out of this program?
I think, the old phrase, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And I tell this to the students all the time. This program has gained acceptance over the years. And it's still a relatively new program in the history of a large church body, okay? And as you know, I'm sure you can relate to this. I certainly can for my years in parish ministry, is anything that's very new, the stakeholders in the congregation are going to wonder, okay, what is this? Why are you changing this? Why are we doing something different? And it takes a while to gain acceptance. And the reason this has gained acceptance, I think, is because the formation programs have done what they said they would do. They've formed guys for these specific ministries. They've formed them in context. They look and talk like LCMS pastors. Don't ask them to exegete a Greek passage, something from the Greek New Testament. They're not going to be able to. Well, some of them can. Some of them do study Greek, and we encourage that. But most are not going to be able to do that. They preach good law gospel sermons. They know how to teach Bible class. They can do pastoral care. They can provide leadership in congregations. Some of that is because of the quality of men when they enter the program, as I shared earlier in the podcast. But a lot of it is the formation, and I get this all the time. Thank you for the great formation you've given me, Dr. Thompson. And I say, it's not me. Now, sometimes I teach their classes, although I teach more residential than I do SMP these days. But it's not me, it's the program, the design of the program that has worked. Our surveys that we've done, and we've been doing this since the beginning of the program, show a high level of success as indicated by mentors, students, district presidents. Our success rate runs at 90 to 95% for people who have had SMP pastors involved with them. And ATS, our accrediting organization, is very impressed with our seminaries programs, and including our distance programs. So I'd say the final thing that indicates the success is that our enrollment continues to be very strong in this program. And we don't recruit. You really can't recruit for SMP. You can just get the word out like we're doing right now. But it has to be the right fit. There has to be the need on the part of the congregation, the qualified individual that will enter the program, a good fit between those, and that is what it takes. So you can't recruit, but you can get the word out. So thank you for doing that today.
One follow-up to that, I think it's a pretty decent number continue to go on, even from a 30,000-foot view. I'm like, wow, 4 years of online hybrid education, and then more to get general pastor. What do you have the percentages? What percentage of people continue to study on or pursue further education post SMP?
I don't.
Okay.
I've been asked that question, and we need to come up with a good answer. I can give you some anecdotal evidence from where I sit, because some of the classes that I teach involve GPC students. I'm going to guess right now it runs at about 20-25%.
Cool.
But that's just a guess. I will say I was just talking to Dr. Rick Mars, who's one of our senior professors here. He just taught a GPC course this winter on pastoral counseling. And he said he had 14 GPC students in there. And the majority of them, were in there because they want to go, they all want to continue their education. In some cases, they want that general pastor's status so that they can receive calls elsewhere, that kind of thing.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Thompson, I want to give you a couple minutes to talk about your new book, but I first just want to thank you for answering the questions and bringing more understanding to what this really great program is. I want to be a champion for it and believe so much in it. And so obviously that's why I'm passionate about it, is I want to see it continue and be a really great thing. And if anybody's listening, they just got an hour masterclass on understanding what the SMP program is. So maybe the students, if they listen, don't even need that first hour at orientation because they just got it right here, right?
There you go.
But no, thank you for that. So tell me, real quickly, and maybe we can talk more or process it later on another episode, but because I really love discipleship, tell me a little bit about Christ-centered family discipleship and what's that going to really entail, and when people can really connect with it, because it's not published yet. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, it'll come out this summer. Well, it's part of this. It was funded. My sabbatical and writing the book, and then my partnership with Concordia Publishing House is funded by this Lilly Endowment grant that is across denominations, where we recognize everywhere we have a problem with young people growing up in Christian homes, not remaining in the faith into adulthood. Okay. And the LCMS is no different than other denominations when it comes to that. And so when you look at what Scripture says, as well as what the research tells us, it shows that the home is key in faith formation and discipleship formation. And what I bring out in the book is I tell the story in my own home and in the congregations that I served. I served 3 different locations prior to coming to the seminary over 28 years. And my experience in moving from what I would call a church-centered approach to raising children in the faith to a combined home-centered and church-supported way of doing that. And if some of the folks listening say, well, that sounds like Ben Freudenberg stuff. He's kind of the godfather of that in the LCMS. It is true. Ben is where I learned it in his book, Family Friendly Church, that was published like now 30 years ago. But I see my book as kind of a sequel to that in a sense, building on what he did. And then I've developed what I call a map for family discipleship that shows the key things that the congregation needs to be doing and the key things home needs to be doing and how they work in partnership in doing those. It's the church in the home and the church in the congregation working together as church. And when you do that, the outcomes become much greater than if it's just dropping your children off for a youth group or taking them to Sunday school, that kind of thing. When the parents realize that they are the primary faith formers of their children, for better or for worse, I might add. So they're already doing it. It's just what faith are they being formed in? Is it a materialist outlook where, you're hoping in getting a good job ultimately and those kind of things? Not that that's not important, but that's different from hoping in Christ our Lord. And the home teaches that through just the natural daily practices that happen in the home. And it's not adding more to the plate of parents to do this. It's just focusing on doing it in a certain way that disciples their children in the hope that we have in Christ and live from God and for God in daily life.
That's cool.
So that's what this is about, and we'll see how it goes. I love partnering with Todd Bierman and Concordia Center for the Family, which our seminary grant has brought them on as partners in this. And they work out in the church in districts. Some of your listeners, I'm sure, have heard Todd speak at district things, or they equip congregations and leaders in congregations for this work. We just focus on forming seminary students in their own homes, and then also to go out and do this in their congregation.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And, you talk about pastoral formation and how important it is. And I think even pastors, I run into so many pastors as we talk discipleship that similar to the parents, that they know that raising their kids, faith formation is important. They just don't know what to do. And I would say there's a similar feeling, sadly, for pastors that they know they need to make disciples. They're supposed to make disciples. They want to make disciples. They don't know what to do. And so any resource that can kind of help them with that, which this sounds like it is like something I want to, hope a champion and get in their hands to help them, that there's allies in this that have thought through this that can help give them a framework. And so you'll have to keep me posted on the progress, and when it goes to print, I definitely want to check it out for myself. So Dr. Thompson, anything I didn't ask that you want to, or any words you want to share that on the way out?
I think you pretty well covered it, Zach. I again appreciate the opportunity to kind of shed some light on the SMP program so people understand its value. As I said, along with the tremendous value of the residential program and what we're trying to do. In my opinion, I think we're pretty well situated for pastoral ministry formation here at Concordia Seminary, and I think so at our sister seminary in Fort Wayne. So do we have things to learn and grow in? Absolutely. And I'll just mention, which I didn't say, thanks for asking one other question, and that is we have been doing a pretty extensive revision, not only of our residential seminary curriculum, but then also more recently I've been doing it of the SMP curriculum as well. So we're always learning. And so we need to partner together with the folks out in the churches. We're all on the same team, and we want to work towards this common goal together.
Yeah, that's cool. Hey, if people want to connect with either you or learn more about SMP program, where should they go these days?
Yeah, great question. So go to the seminary website, first of all, csl.edu. And there you'll see on the tabs academic programs. You click on that, and there'll be a drop down menu. And when you get to SMP in the drop down, just click on that. And there you see some videos that I did, along with, if you want some bedtime reading to fall asleep, there's the SMP manual.
Nice.
Which has a lot of data on what I've talked about, but a lot more on our curriculum. That's also where somebody should go to learn about the application process if they're interested in learning more about that, either on the congregation side or the student applicant side of things.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Dr. Thompson. Appreciate the work that you do in forming men to pastor in our churches, and it's made just an impact in, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives of these SMP students that have come out. So appreciate you, and we'll talk soon, all right?
All right. Thanks, Zach.
Well, there you have it, a really helpful episode to understand what the SMP program is, what it isn't, where it's at today, where it hopefully will go in the future. And I know there's still lots of opinions around it, and hopefully we can continue to have more helpful conversations. And I really am super grateful for Dr. Thompson and for Concordia Seminary for coming on and speaking on the podcast. What a blessing it is to hear from you and to understand more as we seek to raise more pastors in the future. Hey, right after we recorded, Dr. Thompson said he wished he said something that he forgot, and so he would love any interested applicant of any of the programs of our Concordia Seminary, including the SMP, to shoot an email to admit@csl.edu, admit@csl.edu. I really believe and hope that we have many more pastors, and so I hope that inbox gets slammed with new prospective students over the coming weeks and months and years. And so thanks again to Dr. Thompson, and I just want to say to all the former past SMP students, current SMP students, and coming SMP students, I love you, I appreciate you, I care for you, I thank you for your sacrifice for our church body. And thank you so much for really jumping into our church body and breathing a lot of new ministry and fresh breath and just gospel-centered word and sacrament ministries. My prayer is that we see even more of this in the future. So blessings to all those who've gone down the SMP route and will continue to do that. Thank you so much for listening today. We've got some awesome episodes coming up. Next Tuesday, I speak with one of the co-hosts of the youth gathering, Tanner Olson, and we talk about his brand new book. We talk about spoken word, and at the end of it, we break some big, exciting news that I think is going to be a game changer for the future of the LCMS. You are not going to want to miss it, so don't miss it. Follow and subscribe wherever you watch or listen, and we'll see you back next week for an episode of Red Letter Disciple. Have a great week. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.